Okay. So Virtual Security Center, VSC, I'll call it for short, is software that runs a security program. So if you're familiar with management systems like and ISO standards like ISO 9001, 27001 is the standard for security programs. There's 14001. There's a bunch of these different management system standards, right? And that ISO puts together. ISO 27001 talks about an information security management system. And if you think about what we're doing with Virtual Security Center, basically what we're doing is we're trying to help an organization to build their management system for security. And so that's what it does. So key components that we'll see are policies, procedures, risk analysis, compliance reporting, training, and awareness. That's all just kind of rolled in together in Virtual Security Center. There are 3 different types of users, and I'm only going to demonstrate 2 of them today. The third one is the email-only user, and since I'm logging into the website, I'll just show you the website side of it, but I'll talk to you about what the email-only users are. Basically, once we created the software and we started setting it up with customers, we recognized pretty quickly that there are a fair number of people at any organization that really just don't need another piece of software to run, and they don't want it and they don't need it. And so what we recognized was, for most of those people, they're workforce members, you know, and so we just need to get policies to them. We need to get training and awareness to them, but we don't really have to force them to come into another web app. So what we did was we took those things, policies and security documentation, training and awareness, and we send it to the people via email. So you'll hear me mention this as I go through the demo. I'll talk about how task reminders show up in email, awareness and training and policies all show up in email. For most of the users in an organization, they can actually never log in, never even have a password, and they can still get access to everything we need them to do from a security program perspective. So there you go. Most of our organizations, 80 to 90% of their people are email-only users. They don't actually ever log in. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and log in as a standard user. So I've got this this person, Jasper, I think is our, oh, this is a made-up organization on my demo system. And so Jasper doesn't really exist, but for our purposes, Jasper is a regular user, just somebody who has access to the software. And what will happen is, for standard users, someone like Jasper, the reason that they would have access is because we want them to fill out an assessment, we want them to complete a remediation plan, or we have specific procedures that we need them to complete. And for any of those things, we want them to log into the system. But for emails related to passwords, training, and awareness, we could just send those emails to them. So this is my Jasper's account logging in. It looks like, well, it looks like a web application, I suppose. To the left, we see some security tasks. Right now, Jasper does not have any tasks assigned to him, and there's not really too much to do. So this is Jasper's view when he's not doing anything at all. The one thing I want to point out here is there is a thing you can't see, which is the viewer, there's going to be a risk ribbon. So these are the things you can see. Tasks to the left, documentation in the middle, security awareness to the right, and there would be training here if Jasper had training assigned. We might come back to Jasper in a little bit after we assign some tasks to him, and we'll see how that works. Now I'm going to go ahead and log in as Elaine. I think Elaine is my security officer for this organization. So when I log in as Elaine, I can you can see that what Elaine has is a bunch more tasks. This is a demo account. I assigned some tasks to Elaine a while back and I haven't completed them. What that does is allows me to show what happens when a task becomes late. If a task is late, I'll give you a visual cue that it's late. And then you also get an email that says, hey, you've got an assessment that you need to complete, for instance, or a remediation plan, something to review. So because Elaine is our security officer here, Elaine has a lot more to see. What I'll do is I'll give you a quick look at the kind of key components of Virtual Security Center that are focused on the workforce members. So we'll look at policies, standards, and training and awareness. We'll take a look at that first. So the first thing is policies. If I have policies to acknowledge, they'll actually show up here in my security tasks. There will be a task that says acknowledge policies, and you'll also see them listed here. So if I go and look at the policies, this is where all of our the security policies for the organization reside. So this is probably an important point to mention, that as a tool, we're actually doing a handful of different things. We're actually a GRC tool, a governance, risk, and compliance tool. Big enterprises use tools like Archer to solve this problem. It's basically the risk assessment and compliance tracking piece of it. And Archer costs hundreds of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands more in consulting work. But what we're doing is we're a GRC tool. Cool. So let's see. So we've looked at policies, we looked at training and awareness. Let's take a look at the documentation piece. So as I think we've already said a couple times, the library includes a lot of this stuff. So we actually have encryption standard, incident response plan. All of these things will be included as part of the base library, the content that you've gotten. Basically what you can do is you can go into any of these and customize them. Some of them are set up more as templates, which you would expect to customize. Other ones really can be good to go. But you can think about a thing like a password standard, where when you look at the password standard, you might really be looking to change your minimum password lengths or things like that. So you can go in and make modifications to any of these documents. You can turn them off, enable them, or disable them. Just like I showed you for the training, you can do the same thing with documentation. So any of the documents that are available in the library, you can either update, choose to use, choose to not use, and you can add your own. So if you decide that you want to add your own document, you could just go in and add it here. So yeah, so while we were talking, I went ahead and switched which regulatory requirements I'm tracking. So I turned off HIPAA and turned on ISO 27001, and you can now see that when I go back to my risk analysis, I'm now mapping to the NIST requirement and the ISO 27001 requirement, but I'm not worrying about HIPAA. So and what will happen is the mappings obviously change, right? So some controls may be required for, in this case, we happen to have something that hits for both NIST and ISO 27001 across the board. But in some cases, a thing will only map to one or the other. So one of the things though that to keep in mind is we're really aiming to present to you all of the security controls that you probably do need to use. So the idea here was, yeah, these are all controls that really they map to some regulatory requirement, and actually they do things to address threats, so you probably want to do them. And so we're kind of running that. Part of what we try to do to make this easier is we look at each one of the container types. So the term that we use for these is containers. So it might be a home office, a data center, a network closet, an office, loading dock, right? These are all physical location types, right? So we've got these physical locations, but each one of them has different controls that might apply. So what we've done is set up control mappings to each type. So I'll jump back to the locations, and I'll just show you this just by clicking the add button and adding one. There's a bunch of different types. And so we can use these different types to create a new computer room. And what we'll do is it will define the controls that go with the computer room. So the idea here is you're now not asking questions that you don't ask questions that I have to cross off. Now, what we did in the demo this morning is we were talking to somebody and they said, if we had people in a home office, we might not want to require a security camera or an alarm system. And so I said, that's okay. There are people who do have alarm systems and security cameras in their home office. It's probably a good idea, but if you decide as an organization that it doesn't apply to you, you can make them not applicable. And if you do, they won't be part of your risk assessment. You can also accept risk for things. So you can go in and do that. And so as we were walking through the demo earlier, we actually went through and did these changes. Basically what we did was we said, well, let's go ahead and send an assessment to somebody. And what I'll do is I'll go ahead and send an assessment out. And now what would happen is if I if I checked my email, there's an email that arrived in my inbox for Elaine, and it's telling her that she's got a new assessment to do. If I go to my security tasks, we'll find that here. Here's the assessment for home office. So we take a look at that. This is the assessment that came up. For this assessment, you can see a set of controls that we're asking about. What you may notice is that the cameras and the security system don't appear here because we made them non-applicable. So we're basically saying, the risk managers are saying, we don't have to do these things. And because of that, they don't show up in the assessment. So if I go in as Elaine and I say, okay, we do these things, I don't lock my doors, I don't lock my windows, then now I filled out the assessment. I submit that. It's a pretty straightforward assessment. It's fairly easy for folks to answer these questions. You'll see that we don't tell them anything about compliance or risk. We really just want to know if they say they're doing a thing or not doing a thing. And this approach is the same approach we use for facilities, for technologies, and for vendors. If we're sending a vendor assessment to somebody, then we're using the same method for doing the assessment. We're just asking different control questions. You know, and this is probably one of those points where I'd say, usually when I'm talking to technologists, this application is pretty easy to absorb. When I'm talking to non-techie people, the risk analysis looks really complex. And I get what's going on there. This risk analysis piece is the most complex piece of the software because we're doing a lot of different things. We're doing compliance modeling, we're doing threat modeling, we're doing control state, we're allowing people to provide comments. You know, we're saying a lot in the risk analysis. In your organization, most people never see this, but for those who need to do it, if you need to do a risk analysis, it's a really powerful tool for that job. Anyway, I sent the assessment to Elaine. Elaine completed it, and now she actually has an email. She has a message in her task list to come and review this. But when I come back in, I can now see that I can see the control state. These things we hadn't filled out, but what she's done is she's updated, said these were in place. She said door locks and window locks were not in place. And so what you see happen is the risk went up. The base risk, which is the overall calculated risk, it's based on the common vulnerability scoring system. So the base risk is here. And then this weighted risk is based on a weighting that is applied based on the kinds of data that are in the site. So in her home office, this is the kind of data that she works with. So I'll show you that in a second. So base risk and weighted risk are both here, and that's how we track it. So the idea with weighted risk is that we're going to think about the kinds of data that we use within Elaine's home office. So what you can see here is I've said that she has business plans and strategies and she has IT details, but she doesn't deal with PHI. And because of that, when we do this risk calculation, it shows up as a 4, even though the base risk was an 8. Let me show you where we do the weighting for this. This is something that's controlled by risk managers. So the idea is you can look at each of the different types. And so as an organization, I can identify which data types I've got within my organization and what weight. So if I don't have PHI, I can just remove it as an item. If I say, you know what, I want employee data to be a 9 instead of a 10, I can move it. So I can create this weighting. And then as I do that, it governs this weighted risk score. The idea behind this is it's really kind of like this. I have 2 servers. One server is storing, let's say it's storing nothing but my marketing materials, right? And then I have another server, and that server is storing patient information. Those are both servers that I can configure for security, but the risk to the data is different, right? So that's what this allows us to do. That lets us take a look at 2 devices that are similar and understand that the overall risk impact can be different because we're dealing with different data. So this is kind of a cool way for us to get the value of data, so impact. So when you think about risk analysis, it's all about likelihood and impact. So that's one of the ways that impact shows up in our risk analysis. That said, you can do a lot of good stuff here. Just to wrap up the risk analysis piece of it, I'll show you this. There's a couple things that happen, and some of this stuff we sometimes think is like really cool risk analysis stuff, but only for the risk analysis nerds that are out there. And so for people who don't get excited about risk analysis, I guess they're not going to get excited about this. But one of the things we can do is we can say, hey, you can accept risk. So we actually have an option to allow somebody to create a record of this. And so it is a way for us to go in and show that we're, oops, I clicked my right click instead of left click. So I can go in and show that I've actually accepted risk for something. And you can see that what happened here is my little line that shows accepted risk went up. So this is one of those things that, again, risk analysis nerds talk about this a lot. Organizations should be allowed to accept risk. The problem is we never really had a good way of communicating that, or even keeping a record of who did it. Now we can actually show the person who made the risk acceptance. If we want to, we can say it was Keith, you know, and then blame him for it. But we can actually create this record of who accepted risk. Now we've got that in there. And this is a small thing, but it's actually kind of a big deal when you think about risk analysis and how you work with people on this. What we like is in an organization where you find that risk management is trying to work with senior management and help to understand how they approach risk, being able to create this record and then come back and look at our accepted risks is kind of a valuable thing. If we have somebody.
The other reason, just a small comment, Dave, I've been through, and Dave and I have both been through this, but I've been through this like so many times with so many companies and so many healthcare organizations. I know what kind of risk you can accept that the OCR is going to be fine with, right? So it's really kind of a valuable service to have us help with your risk analysis, because rather than it's really easy to kind of sit there and scratch your head for like 4 hours to try to figure out whether you can do something, because a lot of times putting a control in place for that can be really expensive, and you might decide, you know what, I think AWS is probably going to come up with an update in that with that software like in the next 2 months, so I don't want to engineer around that right now.
Right.
I'll accept the risk because I know that Elasticatch or something like that is going to like have that requirement, right? Mm-hmm. So I went through that a lot in Citrix, where we accepted risk because we couldn't understand, because from an engineering point of view, we don't want to have to like rewrite a whole bunch of code in order to accept the risk, right?
Yeah. And if we decide that we don't want to accept a risk, then we can go through a simple remediation workflow. So basically, there's a little remediation tab here for the risk manager. I could create a checklist here. I could just go in and say, okay, check this box that says I want to place locks on the doors to the home office. When I do that, the owner of the container, in this case, Elaine, I'm sending it to myself. So I'm saying, hey me, I need to lock the doors to my home office. So this remediation plan goes to her email. She has instructions to go ahead and make changes to her home office. When she goes into the remediation plan and acknowledges it, she does that, saves that. When that happens, then it changes the risk scores as she's going. I know I like raced through that thing, but the idea basically here is we actually also have a workflow for remediation. If you've got things that you're doing, whether it's a server or location, you're dealing with vendors, you can set up remediation plans and track the things that you need to do. Looking at the scoring piece, you can see this. We came in and we were here. I did a new assessment. When I did the new assessment, our weighted risk went here, accepted risk went back down. I accepted the risk, I accepted one of the controls, the window locks, and that moved my accepted risk up. And then when I fixed the door locks, it moved my overall risk down, right? So I ran through that example really quickly, but what we're doing is we're creating a living risk analysis. So instead of a lot of people who are doing a risk analysis every 3 years, every 1 year, right? They just don't do a risk analysis very often. We've set up a system that allows you to do a risk analysis much more regularly. And as I kind of showed earlier, you can set up these assessments whenever you want. So what a lot of organizations would do is set up a quarterly or an annual assessment of the home office, send that to Elaine and ask her to fill that out. And then that's how they keep track of security. And you can do that for your physical locations. For smaller organizations, you're really just talking about one office. But one of the things that can be kind of cool here is if you happen to have developers who are around the country or around the world, then this can be a way that you can start to get some visibility into physical security for their locations and maybe the technologies as well. So just like the physical locations, which we talked about, we can do the same thing with technologies. So here I kind of have some examples of this. I'll give you two different views of it. So the card view and the list view. Most people, now that they have the list view, are doing that. You can see there's a bunch of information that's shared here. So this allows me to go in, perform assessments. What we're doing here is we're not really replacing your antivirus, your patching. We're not, this isn't a way that you configure your firewalls. This is a way that you keep track of the security settings to make sure that you can validate from a compliance perspective that you're doing the things that you want to do. What we do is we have a library of different technology types. So when you come in and add a technology, you're pulling in from the different types that are here. You can select what kind of device you've got, and then you can add this. If you end up going in and you're like, this is really cool, we wish that we had a device for something else, really just let us know and we can add some of that to it. Down the road, we're going to be setting up something where we're going to allow you to add your own container types as well. So if you have your own custom device and you wanted to be able to create a control model for it, you'll be able to do that. But for now, we've really, if anybody's come in and said that they wanted to add a new type of device, we'll just go ahead and add it to it. But the same kinds of risk analysis techniques work here. So you can think about this from your domain controller. I can go in, set this up. What we're doing is we're asking specific control questions based on the type of device. So if it's a server, we're asking one set of questions. If it's an email server, we're asking a different set. So that allows us to kind of go through and ask just the specific questions that would make sense. In a way, you can think of this as a way of validating that you've done the secure configuration settings for whatever type of device it is. I jumped ahead to the report for procedures. This is actually a new feature, Keith, that you probably haven't seen yet, but this allows us to go in and see all of the procedures that we've run in the organization and jump into the history of it. There's a number of reports that are in here now. So just like as an example, I can go into ISO 27001 report, and as I go through and complete all of the requirements, then it will going to show me that. This is the point where I'm thinking, I probably should have mentioned that this is the demo system, and oh, there you go. Okay, so enough stalling, and there it is. So this is a requirement for the specific one, the specific ISO 27001 controls that are set up in this demo environment, where you kind of get into, I think, the most interesting part for me is we can see how compliance applies at the container level. So for ISO 27001, keeping in mind that a home office, a data center, an office, or a building, they have different control requirements, so they have different compliance requirements as well. And so this allows us to see it, and we can kind of see which locations are creating compliance problems for us, which technologies are. In this case, nothing is addressed. That probably means I haven't done the assessment, but here I've got a missing requirement for laptops. And so you can kind of go through and get a quick view of what within your environment is creating compliance problems for you. And you can do that for whichever of the compliance requirements you track, you'll create a report for that. So cool. Vendor risk analysis is in here as well. So this is cool when you have third parties that are dealing with data. Again, it's one of the great places where it's helpful to be able to do that checkbox where you can say which type of data each one of your vendors has so that you can compare them. One of the nice things about the vendor assessments is I can send them via email to the folks, and I can get them to fill out their responses. The reason that it's worked pretty well for us is because we're not sending a lot of questions. We've got a pretty easy survey. So you've probably already had to deal with this a little bit from third parties. You know, there's a lot of people out there sending surveys, and most of them are hundreds of questions, and it doesn't really make sense what they're asking. What we're trying to do with vendors is to focus on asking these specific questions that would make sense based on a vendor type. So that creates control questions that are actually a little bit easier for them to respond to. So we're getting pretty good response rates from our vendors. I also wanted to show the threat model. You've probably seen it as we've been going along, but when you get into the vendors, you see this really interesting thing. We're asking a bunch of different control questions. And so you can see how our threat models work and how things change depending on what their responses are. So.